Okay, here we go. Well, hello and welcome again to another Pastor to Pastor program. Dr. Jamie Mitchell and I here at the American Pastors Network are really glad to be back with you again in this regard and this effort to try and, Jamie's mostly comes out of your head because you're focused on this, and that is dealing with issues, identifying issues that are real, that are um, undeniable, put it that perspective, and that we all deal with, all of those who are particularly, because the focus of this is pastor to pastor, who are in the pulpit, called of God to shepherd a flock. And unless you have done that, or been involved in anything where you are shepherding and responsible for the lives and the growth and the marrying and the burying and all of those things that come with a pastor, people don't understand those challenges that come. We do, and we also know how many times it's very difficult. We've talked about in other programs for pastors to actually have someone to talk to confidentially because they're afraid because something's going to come back and go to the congregation or whatever. We all know the need. You do, we do. And so part of the purpose for these pastor to pastor programs to deal with some of those kinds of an issues and just in a very informal way. We're sitting here informally in our offices to come to you informally, man to man, leader to leader, and to talk about issues that are real. And we hope and we pray that this program today, as well as others in the past, will be helpful to you. Now, the one today, by the numbers, we know, I know now, just for the for the aspect of transparency, when I'm doing this program right now, I'm just days away from turning 70. So that's where I am in age. All right. Some of you listening may be older than that. You may be younger than that. But surely we know that the pulpit of America is graying. And so as we approach the end of our life, all of us, I'm going through it. I know you are. And that is, okay, what do I do when I begin to approach that time of 70 years and 10, when maybe, according to the numbers, I may not be thinking quite as well as I used to, or I don't have the energy that I did. And God's given you a ministry. Well, what do you do? How are you going to leave it? Are you planning to do so? And that's our discussion and our theme today. You could call it this way, the passing of the baton. Well, we're all going to do it. And perhaps you had a baton passed to you at one point. Well, what are you doing to pass it in an orderly fashion to someone who is coming behind? That's our discussion here today. So, Jamie, all the way through the scripture, when we go to Elijah, to Elisha, and the passing of the mantle, that's a really good one we can get an image of, or Jesus himself in the New Testament to his disciples. He called those who came with him. He trained them, he equipped them, and then he did tell them, I'm going to leave, but I'm going to come back. He said, but I am going to leave. And all of that was in preparation so that when he left, they were prepared in their head, by their hands and their heart, to be able to carry on that task that God the Father had given to God the Son. All right, now that's an example, but share some things now about perhaps from that model that we find from Jesus or others in the New Testament, and then lay it on, build out this aspect here, this passing of the baton. How important is it? How important is it? And then give some examples biblically.
Well, Sam, what's interesting is the whole issue of succession planning is not new and novel. It's new and novel to the church for some reason. We're always a few years and maybe decades behind everybody else. but the world has been talking about this for years. I mean, companies have had secession plans. I have a friend who has a business, and he basically drills down on helping family owned automobile dealerships transfer the leadership from the dad to the children, because it's a tenuous thing at times. Sam, in the financial world right now, in the next 10 years, they're looking at the greatest transfer of wealth from one generation to the next. And there's a great concern within the financial world is, will the next generation be able to handle all the money they're about to acquire? And so everybody and their brother have been talking about this. But for one reason or another, the church hasn't. And part of it is our failure are recognized to see that it is throughout the scriptures. You've mentioned the Elijah passage, you mentioned Jesus. How about Moses and Joshua? Mm-hmm. How about throughout the patriarchal system, and watching how even Jacob brings his sons all together, and he delineates what he wants them to do and how he wants them to do it. And then probably the most relevant one for the church today is how the Apostle Paul structured his ministry and life. He understood that it wasn't enough for what he did, but how he passed it along and prepared those who were going to be behind him to keep things going. Because Sam, the thing is at hand here is this, that if we're ministering and we're growing a ministry and we're building a church, or we're building a mission, whatever we're doing for God, and we're building this thing up, there seems to be a great waste of resources and money and energy and momentum and all of those things if we don't do some conscious thinking about what the future holds and who will hold the future in regards to leadership. When we can be we can be pie in the sky and say, look, it's God's ministry, he'll figure it out. But we don't do that about anything else. We don't do that with our children. We don't have kids and just kind of lay them on the side of the road somewhere and say, well, they'll just figure it out. No, we're very intentional about all these other things. But when it comes to church and ministry leadership, we have not been doing this. And I think we need to sit down and get a game plan for that.
All right. And that's the purpose for the program today. So I'm going to be asking you some questions. And again, if you're watching us right now, all right, we're going to get into what are the difficulties? Who should take the responsibility? You, your board, the congregation, those kind of things, they're real. So we're going to talk them through. But Jamie, before we get into those things, let me just ask you to build out a little bit. You've touched on it, but what are some of what you'd say leading benefits for a planned, orderly, prayerfully done transition of a pastor to another pastor? What are the benefits to the church, and maybe to the pastor himself? And then what are some of the consequences of not doing that, not having an orderly, planned, and thought out transition, or as we've heard it, like the passing of the baton in a relay race? Give some of that first, and then we'll get into some of the reasons of the difficulties.
Well, Sam, let's just talk about it this way. There are a couple of things. Number one, I see that there's a momentum issue. If the church is moving along with the leader, and you don't have at least somewhat of a seamless transition to who the next primary leader or leadership will be, and who will take it the next 15 to 20 years, there's going to be a loss of momentum, and momentum is costly. Momentum costs a lot, and it takes a long time to duplicate. And if you allow the momentum to really decline, then you have to get that whole organization and everything going in the right direction. Now, when that happens, you will naturally lose people. People follow leaders. if you can do a seamless transition, you give people an opportunity to get used to who the next leader is and show their commitment, their allegiance, their comfortableness. They listen, as a preacher, we all have a voice. And you want the people to be able to tune their ear to accept the new shepherd that they're listening to. And so you give the people a chance. Sam, there's a financial issue involved. People give to vision, they give to confidence, they give to leadership. If all of a sudden that leader is now gone and you've had a whole bunch of people who then leave, there's going to be financial things that are going to be involved. And if the church begins to take a hit financially, it takes a long time to recover. It takes a long time to get people to be committed to give and sacrifice at a certain level. And with all of that, then you have programmatic issues. Because if the church loses momentum, it loses people, it loses money. You may have to lay off staff. You may have to downsize or pull back on some of the programming you're doing. And so what created this church or ministry or mission and it being effective and making an impact and drawing people to Christ and all of that now is diminished. And in some respects, you got to start all over again. There's a problem. And here's the final thing, Sam. If you take what some of our forefathers in ministry took, and that was their school of thought was, look, the pastor leaves, we clean house, and we start all over again. Well, that's easier said than done, because then you have a whole bunch of people walking around saying this phrase, well, it's not like we used to do it. And there's this constant comparison. And I'll tell you how we know it. Go to the book of Haggai, because the people got stuck rebuilding the temple because all they kept saying was, oh, remember the temple of Solomon and how beautiful it was? We're not going to have anything like that ever again. And so now you're left with a whole bunch of whiny, disgruntled people. Sam, have I painted a picture enough in people's mind to say, I think we better think about doing succession planning?
Well, you have in mind, and I know that's true. And I'm thinking along, in addition to all of those things, which no one can deny, the purpose for the local church, which is to demonstrate the outworking of God's plan for a local congregation, ultimately to be making disciples and to going out into the community and being an influence. Those primary things are hindered by all the things you just said. Exactly. So it's all the way through. Okay, all right. I wanted to do that because just in case you're watching and you say, well, I hadn't thought through what the consequences could be, they're significant. They're significant. And the benefits are that none of those things happen if it's orderly. So that's the good thing. All right, Jamie, let's come back here and let's go to this aspect of where does the primary responsibility leadership-wise, with whom does it lie in this matter of transition? Is it the pastor? Is it the board? Is it the elders? Of many congregationally led churches, which most are. I've heard many say, well, it's up to the congregation. Well, we all know that the congregation, it's made up of people. All right. So sometimes, I mean, I've known of circumstances where the pastor would say, well, you know what? I'm afraid they're going to boot me out anyway, or something of that flavor. I don't want to bring this up, and I'm going to wait for somebody else to bring it up. And the elders or the deacons are saying, well, you know what? Why isn't our pastor bringing this thing up? Because it's about time, or the congregation says, well, I'm hoping that somebody's bringing this up. Anyways, you get the idea. So where does it lie? Is it a joint? Is it a mutual effort? But where does the primary responsibility lie for successful, seamless transitioning of one pastor to another lead pastor?
Well, the first and foremost is you really can't talk about succession planning unless you're somewhere between 5 and 6 years away from actually happening. However, I will say this, prior to actually starting to have conversations about we need to start thinking secession, there's all those years of ministry beforehand where you're dropping seeds and you're saying things like this, isn't God good to us? Look at what God is doing here. Let's just continue to pray for longevity of ministry and longevity of fruitfulness. And if there's a day when I am not here as a pastor anymore, that the next person who is here will just continue bearing the fruit of what's happening here, because it's the mission and it's the church and it's the ministry that's more important than the minister. However, having the right person in that position is always vital and crucial. So you start planting those seeds. I personally think it has to start with the pastor. The pastor has to be the one who pulls the trigger. Why? Because he has the most to do with it. He will be the one who is most affected by it. It also creates some unneeded tension and conflict within the leadership and the church if the pastor doesn't start talking about it, especially when they start getting to an age where they should be having these conversations. Obviously, if the pastor is in his, let's say, 60s, and he's in pretty good health, and he thinks he can get to 70, 75, then he could wait a little while, but he should start at least having that conversation. But he needs to initiate it. You never want to get to the point where the board has to start bringing it up, because then it makes the pastor feel like, well, these guys want to get rid of me. No, they don't. They love you. They want the best. They want the best for the church, but they also are realistic. And Sam, let me just say this from my study of institutional leadership. If a church has a 20 to 25 year factor, pastor has been there 20 to 25 years, or the church is 20 to 25 years old, there seems to be some institutional changing pains, growing pains that start to take place. And there are some natural places to take a look at that and start to say, maybe we should start going. So to answer your question originally, I said a whole lot of stuff, but they're important. The pastor needs to be the one to initiate the conversation, and then the board has to respond properly.
And I'm going to say, to add to that, to support what you're saying, and everything you said was really very, very, very good, is that you are correct. Though I'm in the position I am as president and founder of the American Pastors Network, I've made it very, very clear. God brought me into this as a minister of God in civil government first, and then brought along to me, for those you're watching, then opportunities to preach across around the world. But as a pastor, as we're talking right now, I have not pastored a church. My flock was my constituency. And that's how I viewed it. And that's a discussion for another day as a minister of God, Romans 13. So I want you to understand that. So I'm going to say this, Jamie, to what you were just saying. And that is this: only the pastor in the church, the leader, to whom the deacons, the elders, the congregation have given their allegiance and given honor and recognition that that man of God is being used of God to guide that congregation. Only that individual in this kind of a discussion can give the freedom, and that's the key word, give the freedom for discussion, because otherwise it's just exactly what you said. If a deacon or an elder is forced to bring up this idea, it doesn't have to, but it can more often than not go sideways very, very quickly. And it's, now I feel threatened. Not the case, but it can happen. So I wanted to bring that up and just say it's so important. And I agree with 100%. The pastor, by taking the lead on this discussion and opening it up, just prevents so many, many, many issues.
But let
Yeah.
me just say this, Sam, that if for some reason you have an elder or a deacon, board member, even a trusted friend in the church, and you're, let's say, in your 60s, and they come to you and they say, hey, Sam or Pastor, or, you know, what's your thinking about the future? You can interpret their motive and what they're trying to do, but as a pastor, we should not be upset by that, because it's just a natural thing. And hopefully, and I say this hopefully, that the pastor, when he gets that question, he says, you know what, that's a great question. I've been thinking a lot about that. I know I'm 62, and I really would love to, if God would give me the strength and the ability, I would love to remain here into my later 60s, maybe 70 would be a good age to start to really actually see transition. I would like to be a part of transitioning so that we can find somebody who will be the next pastor. I can invest time and we can hand this thing off to him, and then whatever role that the church would want me to and the new pastor would want me to be a part of, I would be willing to accept either whatever role within the church or to basically fade off into the sunset. But my concern is that the health and the well-being and the future of the ministry I've just devoted 20 plus years to. That's the kind of response a pastor needs to make.
I absolutely, and I couldn't concur more. That makes a subject that is natural possible, and the freedom to do. All right, now let's go into that. Now, that's the ideal way. Can it be done? Absolutely, it can be done. Who should it be? The pastor himself should lead it, because he alone is in a distinct position. All right, let's back in now. What are some of the reasons why it's not done? Is it, is it just because it's don't know what to do? Is it fear? What have you found? Why doesn't the pastor feel comfortable bringing up an issue like this?
Lack of vision to do it. Maybe they come from the school of thought says, hey, that's not my concern about what the future is. I'm just going to retire, leave. You guys figure it out. I've served my purpose here, and then it's time to go. And again, it's a school of thought. I don't like that school of thought, but there it is. Sometimes that the church has not grown significantly for them to feel like, well, I need to have a succession plan, which I have to be honest with you, Stan, with 90% of the churches in America under 100 people, those are the ones who should take more attention to the whole succession plan, because they are most vulnerable for a church to then go off the rails or to find a new pastor and him start taking them in a different direction. They need a smoother transition. So lack of vision, the church doesn't go, they can't afford it. And here's what I mean by that. For a period of time, you may have to pay two guys on your staff, the senior pastor and the future senior pastor.
Yep.
And that may be viewed as a costly thing. Fourth thing would be resistance by the people. And and in this regards, that the people love you, they don't want change, they're hoping that you'll live eternally. And so they say, I don't want, why are we even talking about this? Well, somebody's pushing out the pastor, and everybody gets their underwear in a knot over it. And the fact of the matter is, that's just because the pastor hasn't done a good work of training them. Here's the fifth and final thing, Sam, is the pastor financially isn't ready to leave.
Yes, that's a big one. I know that. Yep.
And let me tell you, that is a bad reason not to do it. Because you have not given attention to your financial position and your wealth so that you have your retirement planned and laid out. Now, let me just say this to you. And Sam, we've done many a program on Stand in the Gap, and I'm going to be doing it again this coming fall for Pastor Appreciation Month, as I've had experts on helping pastors and churches understand retirement for their pastor and making sure they take care of that. You want to hurt the church's future, don't take care of the pastor's present retirement needs. Because if he feels like he's got to keep working till he's 80, he'll run that church into the ground, but he'll keep getting a paycheck.
I agree. And one thing there, a pastor can help in this area. I've known pastors, you may have been in a church, Jamie, where this occurred, but where it took some men on the elder board, the deacons, some of them happen to be business guys, and maybe that helped, and it does help at times, but to ask that question many years ago, Pastor, we know what we're paying you. Or what are you doing? Actually come alongside to say, how are you using your finances? And then coming to the awareness of which many times they're not aware of just how little that pastor has. And they had to adjust what was given to him, but it was their duty to help come alongside the pastor and help to prepare for that so that the pastor didn't have to come and say, I'm on poverty row because you're not giving me enough. That is a shared thing. So I just throw that out to those who are watching right now, because it really, this aspect of it, the people, the leadership do need to be taught. They do need to step up in an area like this and help to prepare for the time of transition, because
Absolutely,
because it will happen.
it's hugely important. Hugely important. When a pastor doesn't understand what their financial independent number is and what they're going to need in retirement, they'll never leave. And then you've got a really bad situation.
All right, let's bring to a conclusion now. All right, Jamie, you've already said if somebody's in like a pastor is lead pastor is 60, 62, 3, 4, 5, whatever, you know you're reaching that point, and there's nothing magical about 3 years and 10, but we do know that when you start to get around that age, I mean, the knees don't work anymore. It's just harder to move. That's seasons of life. It happens. So therefore, what are 3 or 4 practical suggestions that a pastor or a church could initiate to start the discussion? When should they, and how can they do it in a proper way to move it along so that what happens far too often, no preparations made, and they just wake up one morning and the pastor died in bed of old age, and now they're stuck. All right, we don't want that to happen. That's not the way.
If a pastor is serious about it, he'll go to the board and say, men, I'm not ready tomorrow, but I think in the next coming years, I don't know how many years, but I think we're getting to the place where we're at least seeing the horizon here. And I think we need to start having some plans about secession. Step one is, I think that you put together a separate ad hoc committee or an ad hoc team empowered by the elders or the deacons, and you have a collection of 3, 4, or 5, no more than 5, including the pastor, in a group where you can start to brainstorm on what this might look like. Let me encourage you a couple of things. Not have all elders or all deacons, have 1 or 2, but see if you can find former elder and deacons, maybe a younger upcoming leader in the business world who understands this, is not spooked by this. You have to have some upper management people, Sam, no offense, but you really can't have a line worker in a manufacturing business because he doesn't understand secession. He shows up to his job, he's going to get his 401k when it's all over, and he's going to walk away. You have to get somebody who is in that space of understanding transitions of leadership. Also, my suggestion is that they get some women on that team, because you're dealing with the wife of the pastor and the women in the church, and the hand that rocks the cradle rules the world. And I think you need to have some women in there to speak pink in a very blue world. And I think that's very important. Third thing is, I would say, get somebody in outside of the church who can help talk you through some of these. Either find a church or ministry that has done succession well, ask their leader to come in. You can ask myself, there's other people who do church ministry consulting, to sit down in the early stages and start understanding purpose, goals, objectives, ground rules, and then begin to lay out a acceptable timeline. The big piece of all of this is, at some point you're going to have to find somebody who will replace the pastor. So it's creating the profile of that person. And let me just say this, Sam, and I'll stop talking and let you ask me a final question here. But there is a bad thinking out there in churches when it comes to pulpit committees, and when a pastor even resigns or retires or leaves, a church will say, you know what, our pastor was like this. I think we should get a pastor who now is like this. And they go in and try to find somebody opposite. You know, if they find somebody who was a real strong leader and a great teacher, then they want to find somebody who is more of a counselor and a hand holder, and somebody who I would love to have for a barbecue over. Well, I want to tell you right now, that's death to the organization. That's death to the church. Mm-hmm. Because the person here, his leadership, his abilities, his personality, his bent, his talents, the church has grown and flourished with that person and in that role and that profile. And now you go and replace him with somebody who's the opposite, it's going to blow the church up. So you're going to have to find somebody who is like this person in many ways, but younger and ready to bring maybe new energy, new ideas, and really blend the vision for the future.
All right, all excellent, and we could just go deeper and deeper, but we're trying to bring it down here as we try to keep these programs to about 30 minutes. One last question. We've talked about the approximate time, the age-wise, when the discussion to bring it up would be appropriate. You suggested, you know, as we've talked about, the pastor should lead, provide the freedom for the leadership and the congregation to discuss what is on everybody's mind already, or it will be in a matter of, you know, days or years. So, and then to allow the discussion to progress naturally and with freedom. Now, here is the question. From a pastor's perspective, and I'm actually talking to folks right now on this matter, and that is this. Maybe the discussion has been, maybe they've actually begun the discussion 2 years ago, 3 years ago. Maybe they are now 69, 70, 71, and, you know, all of that. But they don't have a date set yet. And they're just letting it go by. Should a date be set at some point? Should a date be set in the pastor's mind at least, so that he is moving towards a fixed time, lest they have spent many years talking, but they never progress because a date was never set? So talk about the wisdom of setting a date, either publicly or at least in the pastor's mind.
Well, obviously, there's no magic formula to this. It's almost like setting a wedding date. You look at the calendar, you look about when family's going to be around, when family's not going to be around, and timing. And, you know, you don't plan a wedding on the weekend of a college graduation if you have somebody graduating, you know, so there's timing issues and all of that. I guess what you're asking is, when do you announce this? You know, do you announce it? Well, I personally think within that small group of people, you can be very specific in saying, you know, I'm thinking that by July of 2028 is going to be when I'm going to be done. And here's why. I can then take Social Security. I'm going to have all my retirement, blah, 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 blah. My kids will all be married off, whatever it is. There's timing issues, but that small group of people know the date. Then from there, it goes to telling the elders. I think you probably then need about a 6-month lead up. Everybody else who needs to know, all the pieces and players need to go. But part of this is unwinding the process. Gene Getz, one of my mentors, when he transitioned the church to his associate, this is about 20 years ago, he took a 2-year process, and it basically started this way, Sam. The first, for 6 months, his replacement preached about 15% of the time. Then it was moved up to 30% of the time. Then it moved up to 50% of the time. And then the last 6 months, Gene was only preaching about 25-30% of the time, and then he was done. And they just did a very easy thing. Everybody knew what was happening. They were talking about it. But then it came to the celebration that Jeff now is our new senior pastor and Gene is our pastor emeritus. And that was it. And I think you don't want a long period of time where you're setting that date and you get it out. And that you pass the baton well, because not passing the baton is painful. I think I shared this with you in my last story, is that if you study the last number of Olympic Games, you will find that the U.S. team had the best relay teams on paper. They were mostly gold medal winners, but they failed at winning the relay races because on 3 different occasions they dropped the baton. They had the best people on paper, but they didn't win the race because they didn't pass the baton.
Thank you, Jamie. This has been really very good. All of you for watching us. Thanks for being a part of this. And I hope you ask yourself the question, are you prepared to pass the baton? How will you pass it? Is there someone coming behind who is willing to accept it? That's all part of a process, and that's why this program was all about successfully passing the baton. It's going to come to all of us. We can either stumble into it and drop the baton, or we can plan and practice and keep the momentum going and do it all excellently for the glory of God. And that's our hope and our prayer. Thanks for being with us today. And again, we'll have more of these. So keep coming back to this website for you past programs and new ones as they are posted.